Okay, here we are, taking a look at some anatomical images of the sacrum to give you all a better imagery sense. I highly suggest you check out anatomy books, and Google is a great resource as well. So we've talked about various pieces in various videos, but the sacrum is basically this triangle-shaped bone, and here it is from the front of the pelvis. This gives a really good image of the keystone, right? So you can see that the main arch of the pelvis is this back arch, and then we also have this arch in front. And actually, in many ways, the pelvis is just pure arches in all different directions. But this main arch, the keystone, would be the sacrum. So you can see the SI joints and the tailbone hanging freely, right? This is an important image that the tailbone is, from a bony landmark perspective, hanging by itself. It's wide open, the bottom of the pelvis. And of course, we have a ton of muscles here which will form the pelvic floor, but those are all designed to move. And even these bones are designed to move. So let's look at the next image. This is a great image. I love teaching with this image because for a lot of reasons, actually, but you can really see the curve of the sacrum here, right? The original sort of primary curve. And then you can see these protrusions in back, which were originally spinous processes. And then really interesting is it's labeled the auricular surface. This is the SI joint from the sacrum side. Now it's cool because that joint, which is sort of like an L or sort of like a boomerang, and you have to remember these are very different. I read once some statistic about the standard deviation between humans from the anatomy books, and it's very high. It was something like 75%. Like 75% of you won't have bones that look like this, basically. So this image we're looking at is just one bone that someone in some lab decided was average looking and they drew. But we do have this auricular surface, which has a curve opposing the curve of the entire bone, which is really cool. Projecting forward at the top front, you can see the base, or it's labeled body here, but that is the base of the sacrum, or the promontory, the sacral promontory, which is where the rest of the spine will continue. And you'll see that this is about, more or less, how it would be situated when we were standing. So we can look at that angle that L5 would be resting on. Pretty cool. Here it is from the top. This is a really beautiful image as well. It looks like some sort of mushroom I'd find in an Oregon farmer's market or something, or like two horns sort of coming off this center piece. And this is labeled ala, which I believe in Latin means wings, right? So you get that sort of wing look. And then from the top here, you can really see the way this used to be what we would consider a normal or standard vertebra. So that's the foramen which the spinal cord would be passing through. And then these sort of protrusions on the top that are angled up and back, those are your facet joints of the sacrum. So let's look at the next image. This is great too, because this has, right, that relationship of the pelvic half to the sacrum. And I like it because it's only one side, because it really gives you a sense of, okay, yeah, this is how the SI joint is sort of going to connect. And when we start talking about how to balance the joint of the femur head with the SI joint, your two hip joints, right? People think about one hip joint, but like the shoulder, which has multiple joints to create the quote unquote shoulder joint, so does the hip, right? We have the SI joint, and then the femur head will fit into the socket of the pelvic half. Next image, and this is that original image laid over with the curve of the entire spine. So this lets you see how the sacral promontory is sloped forward or down, which will actually create the lumbar curve, which is a secondary curve, right? It's going against the original forward curve of the spine in order to create our upright posture. That's really a great way to get a handle on those 4 or 5 or sometimes 6 curves of the spine. Right here we would have 1 of the sacrum, 2 of the lumbar, 3 of the thoracic, 4 of the cervical. Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen talks about a 5th, or that would be the 6th curve actually of the skull, which would be also a primary curve. And then if we actually had a tail, which is an image that's really useful, that would be going in another secondary curve. So that would be our 5th or our 6th curve. But it all kind of, in some ways, begins with this curve of the sacrum, which is in an adult stable and it doesn't change. This is a real bone. And I wanted to show this because it's very different, right, from the model. The model, I'm actually holding a model in my hand, and mine is much wider, and it seems more perfect or something in my model. And in this one, I'm like, oh, well, that one's quite a bit taller and narrower, and the facet joints maybe are a little different. You see the left facet is very different than the right facet. It's narrower, maybe a little taller. The right facet is a little wider. So just get a sense that, the images you see are not what you're going to find in your body. And they're going to help you to develop a kinesthetic sense, but it's really about touching and feeling what's going on in your own body. Here we have an image of the front, the anterior side. And I'm not sure if this is the same bone or not. It looks like it could be, but I'm not sure. So you can imagine that you would have your colon and your rectum right in front of this, actually. That would be your digestive tract, the bottom of your digestive tract passing, and then your sexual organs and your bladder would be in front of that in the pelvic bowl. It's really sort of cool to think about. And here is an image that is kind of hard to understand when you first start looking at it, but this is a sacrum with clearly nerves and muscles and ligaments. They've cut away some, so we're getting this interesting image. So to visualize where the sacrum is, you can start at the tailbone. You can say, oh yeah, that's the tailbone, right? It's got all this ligaments and things that we'll talk about later. And then it goes up and you really can't see the edges. Now that's for 2 reasons, right? Because 1, the pelvic half is going to be connecting in and sort of blocking the edges of the SI joint on the sacrum side. And 2, because we have all the muscles and things that are covering it. So this is a much sort of truer representation, even though they've cut off some of the more external muscles. So you start to get a sense of, oh yeah, it's not just bone, it's buried in this entire web of a system that's all designed to work together. And then the last image, maybe before I even say anything, just look at it for a second and start to realize what's going on. So if we start at the right, actually, this is labeled pubis. That is basically 1/2 of the pubic bone. And there's a really cool line here, which is this essentially connection point for muscles, which is sort of free floating, almost like a clothesline. I love to talk about images of this. The iliopectineal line, that would be part of the pelvic half, the thickest part of the pelvic half. And then, of course, now we're looking at the sacrum from the side. And then we can see coccyx is labeled. So there you go. I hope those images help as you continue to work on your own embodiment. If you enjoyed this video, sign up for the InBody Space newsletter and share the link with a friend. You can also find original content on Facebook and Instagram.